Today I'm going to be teaching you how to knit the alternating cable cast on, which you can see here. And this basically just gives you a nice edge for a 2x2 rib, or a 1x1 rib actually. It's nice and stretchy, but it's also neat. It looks much nicer than the regular cable cast on, and it's just a nice alternative to a 2x2 tubular cast on. So we'll get started now. Okay, so you start your cast on with a slip knot, which I'm then going to pop on a needle and just tighten that up. So this will count as our first stitch, and because we're casting on in a sort of rib formation, we're going to call this a purl stitch. The first row, or round if you're working in the round, will be casted on in a sort of 1x1 formation. Because we want to turn this into a 2x2, we'll need to do some adjusting and sort of move the stitches around on the following row. But just bear in mind, this first row will be casting on in a 1x1 formation. If you wanted to knit a 1x1 rib, then just proceed as that, but then we will be alternating and changing our stitches around on the second row. So that's going to be called a purl stitch. Now we're going to create a knit stitch, and that is purely just by knitting into that first stitch as you would normally, bringing that loop out, and rather than slipping it off this needle here, we're just going to pop it back on the needle. So that's going to be our knit stitch. Now we're going to create a purl stitch, and the way that we'll do that is by going in the gap between the two stitches, you see? And then I'm wrapping around as if to purl, pulling the loop out, going around the back of the stitch and just hooking that onto our left needle and giving it a little pull. Now to add a knit stitch, I'm going in between the two, wrapping my yarn around the left hand needle, pulling the stitch out, hooking it around the back. So just to be clear, this one you knit into like you would if you were knitting a regular stitch, you know, if you were just knitting rather than casting on. These stitches are all casted on by putting your needle between stitches rather than into the stitch. So we've just got a purl stitch, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, a knit stitch. We're going to create a purl stitch now, so I'm going around the back of my work, putting my needle between the two stitches, purling the stitch pretty much as regular as if I was just regularly purling as opposed to casting on. Then this loop, I'm going round the back and putting my left hand needle into that stitch. Now I'm going to create another knit stitch, going through the front between these two stitches, wrapping my yarn around as if to knit, bringing that loop through, pulling it out loose, and then putting it back onto my left hand needle. So I'm going to proceed and cast on a few more so that you get a good idea of what the process is. Okay, so I think we have enough stitches here. What we're going to do now, if you are knitting in a 1 by 1 formation, then you can just knit as you would, so knit, purl across and continue your rib as you would with that. However, I want to knit a 2 by 2 rib, so this is going to require a little bit of moving the stitches around just to get the correct formation of stitches. So what you're doing here is sort of swapping stitches around, similar to as you would with a when you're sort of cabling without a cable needle, but I'll show you here. So the first stitch is a knit stitch and I want to continue like that, so I just knit that stitch as normal. Then the next stitch here is a purl stitch, however I want it to become a knit stitch. So what I'm going to do is swap these two stitches around. So what I'm going to do is put my needle purlwise through the front of that knit stitch, slip it off, and that will force the stitch in front of it off. And then immediately I'm just going to catch that with my left hand needle and then slip that knit stitch back onto the left hand needle as well. So now I've got a knit, purl and then another purl. So that's all just been sorted out. So I'm going to knit, then purl, and then this is already a purl, so I'm just going to purl it. So already I've got knit 2, purl 2. The next stitch here is a knit stitch, so I'm going to knit into that. Then I can see that that's a purl stitch. I don't want that to be a purl stitch, I want it to be a knit stitch. So again I'm going to swap those two around. So I'm putting my needle into the front of that knit stitch purlwise, slipping it on to that right hand needle, forcing both of them off. The purl stitch has now become a live stitch hanging off at the back. I'm just going to catch that with my left hand needle, then slip the knit stitch back onto the left hand needle, and then again I've already knitted my knit stitch. I'll knit my second knit stitch that I've just switched around with the purl. Then I have 2 purl stitches waiting for me, so I'm going to knit those 2 purls. So essentially what you're doing, out of those 4 stitches that are coming, I'm knitting that one, purling that one, and then just swapping those 2 around so that the knit is next to the other knit and that purl is next to the other purl. So I'm creating a knit 2 by 2 formation. Okay, so that is your 2 by 2 formation. Now depending on the amount of stitches that you have cast on, you'll either end up with knit 2, purl 2 all the way through to the end, or in my case you'll end up with 2 knit stitches at the end. In that case you will be knitting a knit stitch over what was casted on as a purl, but it's really not a big deal. Just knit in the correct rib formation that you want to. So what I'm going to do now is go away, knit this rib just a little bit longer, and then I'll show you an example of how it looks when it's finished. So I'll see you in a short while. So there you go, I've just knitted a good chunk of 2x2 rib, and you can see that all of those cast on stitches fit beautifully into the ribs that we've created now. And you can see that, you know, the cast on stitches match up beautifully with the knit stitches here, and then the purl stitches match up beautifully there. So that's why we do the 2x2 alternating cast on. It just looks a lot more seamless, neater, and it's nice and stretchy too. And you can see on the reverse as well, it looks super neat. I mean, in a 2x2 you do tend to get a little bit of that kind of slanting effect because we have had to cross over a couple of stitches, but it's really not a big deal. I find it much more pleasing to the eye and much more functional than a regular cable cast on. And if you're someone who doesn't really enjoy or don't know how to do the tubular cast on, then this is a great alternative. So I hope this has been helpful. If it has, please share it with your friends and like this video. And I'm doing tons of tutorials these days, so please do subscribe. I'd love to have you following us on YouTube. Thank you very much, and I shall see you very soon.